Hello, and welcome back to the show, readers and reflectors. Today, we are going to do a subject that stands either to increase my number of fans and their appreciation for me, or to decrease it. And whichever outcome comes, it comes. I'm not opposed to it. This is what we call a controversial subject. And, I'm not, ever since I got back into this channel, I've noticed that I'm talking more, which is very peculiar to me. I'm not a very talkative guy. And what I appreciate in people who speak is those who are unafraid to touch on subjects that are discomforting. And because, those, to me, are where the conversations are most needed. You can't just let these things fester up in people that have genuine interest in them and that may have a whole lot of significance that we're just overlooking because talking about it makes us afraid. And that subject is drugs, and particularly psychedelic compounds. And to do that, we'll be resorting to Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception. And it's been a really long time, actually, since I've read this book. It's probably been 4 years, which is a shame. It's wonderfully written and a very great book. But I picked it up last night. I've just been going on my bookshelf and finding books that I've read already, and I'm getting those out of the way. And in the meantime, I'm reading more so I can relate them to you guys. And if there's one thing that this book proves is that the old theory of this is your brain on drugs. I don't know if you guys have seen that advertisement. The old theory of you take drugs or psychedelics and that your mind will melt away and you become just totally dumbfounded and unintelligent. You can't even function anymore. It's totally disproved by this book. He writes so splendidly. And after his experience of ingesting mescaline is the compound that he uses in it. And you think about it, a lot of our music that we appreciate comes from people who had an appreciation for these substances. There was something to the ingestion of them that they found very valuable. It gave them insight and memory, and they proved that, or have shown rather, that the ingestion of these substances can change one's personality trait of openness to experience, which you're going to need if you take them, by a whole standard deviation, which is huge if you guys know any statistical measurements. So we're going to get into this, and I'm just going to come off right off the bat and say that I have experienced the sort of thing that he is talking about, and I would like to say that how he iterates this is so wonderful and so accurate, and I find a lot of overlap with my experiences. And to begin, I selected a passage which gives you a sense of the uniqueness of our own individual experience of life on the whole. You take behavioral psychologists, or generally scientists, and they seem now to neglect the depth of inner experience. They're focused on the physiology, the neurons that are circulating through the nervous system, and less and less we find people paying mind to mind, which we like to derive from physical causation, but we don't know the slightest thing about mind. That is the big mystery. I mean, you could make that synonymous with God. I mean, that is, it almost, you could say in a weird way that it proves God, but that's so liable to argumentation, and I don't want to make any claims about fundamental reality. But just that we have mind at all, and that it seems ongoing. We never perceive the same thing twice. We're just always entering new spaces internally. That is amazing. And that's something that really interested Huxley. Very cool guy, very interested in religious phenomenology and just how mystics think. And I am too. We live together, we act on and react to one another, but always and in all circumstances we are by ourselves. The martyrs go hand in hand into the arena. They are crucified alone. Embraced, the lovers desperately try to fuse their insulated ecstasies into a single self-transcendence. In vain. By its very nature, every embodied spirit is doomed to suffer and enjoy in solitude. Sensations, feelings, insights, fancies, all these are private and, except through symbols and at second hand, incommunicable. We can pull information about experiences, but never the experiences themselves. From family to nation, every human group is a society of island universes. And I said something to this effect in one of my other videos. Each one of us is really our own universe. I mean, you read somebody like Jung and his theory of the collective unconscious, it tells you that there are many similarities between our individual experiences, which we could call objective psychic facts. And usually when you think of psychic phenomena, we attribute the term of subjectivity. But there are correlates, there are similarities nested in our nature. We are all human beings, and we emerge from the same natural process, and through that continuum of time we are taking into ourselves these kinds of perceptions, and he calls them the archetypes. Jung, that is. To see ourselves as others see us is a most salutary gift. Hardly less important is the capacity to see others as they see themselves. But what if these others belong to a different species and inhabit a radically alien universe? For example, how can the sane get to know what it actually feels like to be mad? Or, short of being born again as a visionary, a medium, or a musical genius, how can we ever visit the worlds which, to Blake, to Swedenborg, and to Johann Sebastian Bach, were home? This is really interesting to me. This is what I was saying before about his fascination with mystics. Because today, most people just shrug their shoulders at somebody who is alleged to be a mystic and think, oh, well, he just has a very active imagination, but there's nothing particularly special about him, and if he is special, then it's his insanity that distinguishes him. And I don't buy that. I mean, I think that there is something to individual experience that is, well, it's first off the most real thing there is. And you talk about visionaries and what they're seeing in their own experience. We don't understand what these things are, and you can, or they can, tap into these strange experiences, or rather they come upon them even without their own willing it, and it's as if they have this access to voices that perhaps are objectively there beneath the surface of consciousness for us all, but they have a loosened border, so to speak. These images, these voices, they surface more readily for them than for the ordinary person. And it's a very pretentious term. I don't think there is actually an ordinary person. We are all so peculiar. Okay, and now he gets into the experiential aspects of it. He has ingested the mescaline now, and he's going to talk about how it has changed his perception. The really important facts were that spatial relationships had ceased to matter very much, and that my mind was perceiving the world in terms of other than spatial categories. At ordinary times, the eye concerns itself with such problems as where, how far, how situated in relation to what. In the mescaline experience, the implied questions to which the eye responds are of another order. Place and distance cease to be of much interest. The mind does its perceiving in terms of intensity of existence, profundity of significance, relationships within a pattern. I saw the books, but was not at all concerned with their positions in space. What I noticed, what impressed itself upon my mind, was the fact that all of them glowed with living light, and that in some the glory was more manifest than in others. In this context, position and the three dimensions were beside the point. Not, of course, that the category of space had been abolished. When I got up and walked about, I could do so quite normally, without misjudging the whereabouts of objects. Space was still there, but it had lost its predominance. The mind was primarily concerned not with measures and locations, but with being and meaning. And along with indifference to space, there went an even more complete indifference to time. There seems to be plenty of it, was all I would answer when the investigator asked me to say what I felt about time. Plenty of it, but exactly how much was entirely irrelevant. I could, of course, have looked at my watch, but my watch, I knew, was in another universe. My actual experience was still, of an indefinite duration, or alternatively, of a perpetual present made up of one continually changing apocalypse. Yeah, so space and time. Space loses most of its significance, not all of it. You can still go around and gauge how far away is this thing, and you can be cautious. You're not stumbling around and running into things, kind of thing. That's maybe a stigma that people have about it, that you lose your lucidity in relation to external things. And you do, granted, turn more inward. It's a very inward psychic experience. But you can still function to a degree, and I have not taken mescaline. I won't even say which ones I have or have not. And by the way, this is pertaining to the subject of drugs. I just want to say this is for harm reduction purposes. This is intended to educate, that thing that all the drug channels say at the beginning of their videos. I forgot to say that at the beginning, but yeah, guys. Yeah, so you can still move around quite well, and time is just stretched to its utmost extremes and beyond, and you experience, who was it? It might have been William Blake, and that's actually who he got the title of this book from. I'm trying to remember how the rhyme went, but I could hold eternity in an hour was part of it, and that's definitely a very psychedelic thing to say. And You can experience eternity in a second. The time is very confused, and we see it as for what it is, as a human construction. When mescaline reduces the brain's normal ration of sugar, what happens? I actually have not looked into the physiological. I know it's a serotonergic agonist, but in terms of sugar, I'm not sure what mescaline does, if it actually does reduce the ration of sugar. Too few cases have been observed, and therefore a comprehensive answer cannot yet be given. But what happens to the majority of the few who have taken mescaline under supervision can be summarized as follows. First, the ability to remember and to think straight is little if at all reduced. Listening to the recording of my conversation under the influence of the drug, I cannot discover that I was then any stupider than I am at ordinary times. Okay, and this, I would say mescaline is unique in that from what I've heard of people's experiences with it, I have never done it, but there seems to be a greater normality in the mescaline experience than most of the other psychedelic drugs. Your thought, okay, that's what it is. That's the distinct thing about it, is that your thought retains the continuity that it has in ordinary waking consciousness. While with other ones, the ones that I may have or may have not taken, the thought patterns are changed drastically. It's, at first, your spoken kind of verbalistic thought is going off the chain. It's thinking it's dying for the first hour, and this is termed ego death, and that's very much what it is. It's against their own will. At least some of people experience this, is that it's saying, oh my gosh, I'm dying, this is crazy, I shouldn't be feeling this, and then that goes away, and then you're just in this visual, your thought becomes vision. You see the thoughts in really defined, high-resolution shapes and orientations and moving pictures. In the second, visual impressions are greatly intensified and the eye recovers some of the perceptual innocence of childhood when the sensum was not immediately and automatically subordinated to the concept. Interest in space is diminished, and interest in time falls almost to zero. Okay, this is really interesting, the perceptual innocence of childhood. And he talks about this at other times in terms of Gestalt psychology. It's this exercise of direct experience, because most of the time we think that we are experiencing things directly, when really we are experiencing our ideas of them in terms of concepts. We're just thinking, if I'm feeling bad, you're thinking more about the thought than the actual feeling. And almost, this could be a tenet of Gestalt psychology. If you're feeling bad, in a way that your thought registers that so. If you sink into the feeling itself and try to deprive it of that sentiment of I am feeling bad and just get into the feeling itself, that can actually cure the feeling and even give you an appreciation of it. It's this back to the childhood where we're not imposing our ideas onto either internal or external phenomena. We are just experiencing them for what they are, void of our judgment of what's going on. And psychedelics throw you glaringly into that state. You're just totally immersed in the going on and not your your analyzation of what's going on. Yeah, and I think that's very valuable to people who don't know it, and you get this from meditative practice as well. You sit down and you just breathe, and you'll notice that your thought is just kind of, it's working autonomously. It's just chit-chatting about whatever. It could be anything. And then the more you practice it, the more you learn to just experience the sensations and to notice your thinking rather than identify with it, which many of us do and causes much suffering. 3. Though the intellect remains unimpaired and though perception is enormously improved, the will suffers a profound change for the worse. The mescaline taker sees no reason for doing anything in particular and finds most of the causes for which, at ordinary times, he was prepared to act and suffer profoundly uninteresting. He can't be bothered with them, for the good reason that he has better things to think about. Oh my goodness. That's maybe the core effect of what it did or did not have on me. It causes you to evaluate. It is a twice-born experience. You go into it, and you bring into it all these prior habits that you have been exercising with so much devotion, whether in thought or in bodily action. And then after it, you see less and less why you were doing those things. It's as if Michael Pollan said this in, what was it called? He wrote a book about psychedelics, and before he used to write cookbooks or something. And he said it's as if you have a mountain, and your mind is a mountain, a ski mountain, covered with snow. And there are all these pathways that have been so deeply entrenched because that's our habits. You just go down these already formed pathways. And what happens with the psychedelic experience is as if it snows over them again and you get a chance to form new pathways. And I think that's so true. All these prior habits that you had, whether it be smoking, which it's been shown that psychedelic use can greatly speed up the cessation of smoking, or anything else that you may find destructive to you but that you have a hard time breaking, they have the potential to cause unaction, and then if you wish to replace the void with newer and better action. 4. These better things may be experienced as I experienced them out there or in here, or in both worlds, the inner and the outer, simultaneously or successively. That they are better seems to be self-evident to all mescaline takers who come to the drug with a sound liver and an untroubled mind. It's this goes back to what I was saying about the whole God argument, is for people that have had these experiences, you almost instantly come to the realization that he's been under our noses the whole time. We've been looking at him all of the time, but we just did not know it was God. We do not see the profundity of all that goes on around us and inside of us. We just look at it as if it's totally banal and normal, when really if you just look at something for long enough and realize that you're looking at something, that we're not in the infinite black. We are in this experience that is so rich, and that there are so many ways of seeing one and the same thing, and that you pile on top of that there are a mere infinite number of things to see and to experience, and ways to see those things and experiences. Whoa, I mean, it comes down to the omniscience, omnipotence that we attribute to God, is that we have this inexhaustible range of experience and interpretation of experience. And that is just mind-blowing. And the people who have these experiences know that right off the bat, most of them. But some people, I have met people who have had these experiences and it had no really lasting effect on their personality. And yeah, I mean, I sympathize with them. Maybe some people are just more prone to the, I'll say it, positive effects of these, because they have been attributed so much negative effect, when really there is, it can, okay, it's with somebody who, say, has a tendency toward depression. It could give that person the wherewithal to be able to endure those bouts of depression without being swallowed by them, because you have this greater capability of interpreting your depression in different ways. And that's, we cannot overlook that. That is huge. Mescaline raises all colors to a higher power and makes the percipient aware of innumerable fine shades of difference, to which, at ordinary times, he is completely blind. It would seem that, for mind at large, the so-called secondary characters of things are primary. Unlike Locke, it evidently feels that colors are more important, better worth attending to, than masses, positions, and dimensions. Like mescaline takers, many mystics perceive supernaturally brilliant colors, not only with the inward eye, but even in the objective world around them. Similar reports are made by psychics and sensitives. There are certain mediums to whom the mescaline taker's brief revelation is a matter, during long periods, of daily and hourly experience. This is what I'm saying, is that there are people who are naturally imbued with this strong filter, and I'm trying to remember, he has a name for it in this book. I can't remember it right now. But all of us have this filter, and maybe we could make it synonymous with consciousness, but this filter that suppresses many unconscious contents that are no less real because they are suppressed. We just don't notice them. And then some people have a weaker filter, so all of that bleeds up from the depths, and they're well acquainted with the things that go on in the background, as Jung said in his autobiography. And that's what categorizes the mystics, the seers, is that they have a weaker, the boundary between consciousness and unconsciousness is much looser for them. All of the unconscious contents come up to the surface much more easily. I think I may end it here, guys. There's this really cool article at the end of the book that I would love to get into right now, but it's kind of long and I haven't selected any specific passages. But there is something he says in it, and which I think is very important to mention, is, well, he said that the revival of religiosity would not take place in churches or in organized institutional religion, but through biochemical processes, and by that he's talking about psychedelics. And I see that today. There are more and more people who take psychedelics, and they have this profound shift in their being. Everything they see and how they talk and their habits, they change so drastically. It may be for the better. I would say I am partial. I see it mostly for the better, but it can definitely be for the worse. I've seen it mess people up, and there are people who, if they have grandparents or parents or anybody in their bloodline who had schizophrenia or any kind of manifest or disposition to a mental illness, if anybody in the chain of this person's family had such a thing, and you are the offspring of that person or those people, then you are more predisposed, if you take psychedelics, to have a either psychotic break or just a kind of gradual surfacing of something that was already inherent within you, some kind of mental disorder. And so the safety profile of these things is very great. I mean, they are very safe, but not safe enough to say everybody should take them. No, definitely not. You have to go into your family chain and find out whether anybody had a history of mental illness or a disposition to it, which is not easy to do. And the cool thing about this revival of religiosity that he's talking about, or well, I don't know if it's cool, but it's something we have to deal with, is that it seems to undermine the ecclesiastical, which is to say the churchly aspect of it. The people who have these experiences have a very hard time of getting themselves to go to church and to perform these rituals to apprehend God and to reach communion with Him. It seems as if they have developed a inexorable taste for the experiential component of it rather than the using the church and the priest as a medium for God. It seems, I don't want to say superficial, but it seems lackluster in comparison to the actual, I have the means to take something, and it lightens this border between consciousness and unconsciousness, and I get to directly apprehend the unconscious contents. And I would say all of our ideas of God and mystical experience, all of this crazy potential that we have inside of us, but that our consciousness mutes, this is all to be found in the unconscious. And this is why I enjoy reading people like Jung, is that he's aware that religious experience it's always going on within us, but we're not immersed in it because our consciousness is keeping it at bay within us. We couldn't be in everlasting religious experience like the mystics are and have a functional society that has industry and that actually cares about its worldly accomplishments, because we would be musing all of the time and talking to spirits and having really enthralling feelings, and nothing would get done. It's this incompatibility between the mystic seer and the Western busy go-getter. I'm focused on my accomplishments, and if I'm a churchgoer, then I'm focused on my attending church. That's how I reach God or come closer to Him. And with the psychedelics, you have these experiences that for even years after give you this certitude, this knowing that is absent of cognition of God, of mind. He says mind at large. You just have this undying awareness of your awareness. And I could go on, but I'm going to leave it there, guys. I'm not, again, encouraging anybody to do this. Please heed my words. If you're going to do it, I can't stop you, but please do your research about the drugs themselves and about your family, so that you know whether or not you're predisposed to a mental illness, because that makes all of the difference. And if you're not, then they seem to be relatively safe. But I do not encourage anybody to do it, because even if you're not predisposed, it's no walk in the park. It's not how it's portrayed as a recreational and giddy experience. Oh, it definitely can be that. But in my experience or lack of experience, I would say that it is it comes with heaven and hell. There's the light parts of it and there's the very dark parts of it, and it was like a purging effect. Whatever I brought into it that was weighing me down, I only was able to get rid of because I experienced the hell head on. That's the only way to do it. So I'm going to leave it there, guys, and have a good one. I'll see you next time.